Hey guys, tonight we're going to trace the winding, slightly jittery story of coffee, beginning not in a Parisian cafe or a hipster barista's corner, but in the rugged highlands of Ethiopia. Picture the slopes. Cool morning mist drifts over sharp ridges, little huts cling to the hillsides, and somewhere between patches of green, you see wiry goats hopping about with way too much enthusiasm. You rub your eyes and wonder if maybe you're still dreaming, because these goats look like they've had 3 espressos too many. But no, this is exactly where the legend of coffee starts. And yes, spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive here without a very sturdy pair of sandals and a strong stomach for goat cheese. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing with a shepherd named Kaldi. At least, that's the story people love to tell. Kaldi notices his goats getting a little too lively after chewing on bright red berries from a scraggly shrub. Instead of panicking, as you might when your pets start bouncing like toddlers after Halloween candy, he gathers a handful of the berries and wonders if maybe this bush has something magical inside. That's your first encounter with coffee, centuries before it ever touches European lips. The Ethiopian highlands aren't an easy place to wander. The soil is rocky, the paths twist like a puzzle, and you're breathing thin air at high altitudes. But farmers here have always adapted, coaxing crops from these slopes. Coffee plants thrive in this environment, shaded by taller trees, fed by mist and drizzle, and guarded by those excitable goats. The mainstream historical fact is that Ethiopia is widely recognized as the birthplace of Coffea arabica, the species that still dominates most of the world's coffee production. The beans, really seeds inside cherries, weren't brewed at first. They might have been chewed raw or mixed with animal fat into an early kind of energy ball. Forget protein bars. This was the original hiking snack. You squat beside a fire, watching someone roast the cherries, not to brew a drink, but maybe to test what happens. The smell of burning fruit wafts up, pungent and unfamiliar. One quirky tidbit here. Some accounts suggest early Highlanders might have fermented the pulp into a kind of wine, a jittery cousin to grape vintages. Imagine swirling a goblet of coffee wine, nodding as if you're at some fancy tasting, pretending to notice earthy notes with a hint of goat hoof. It didn't exactly take off, but the idea that coffee wasn't always destined to be brewed is strangely comforting. Historians still argue whether the Kaldi tale is pure legend or loosely based on some shepherd's real observations. There's no hard evidence of dancing goats in medieval manuscripts, and yet the story lingers because it feels so human, an everyday accident turning into a world-shaping ritual. You're reminded that much of history is just gossip that somehow survived the centuries, wrapped in smoke and storytelling. As you wander further down the hillside, you pass through dense forests where wild coffee plants still grow today. The leaves are glossy, deep green, whispering as the breeze stirs them. You reach out to pluck a cherry, its skin taut and red, and pop it in your mouth. It's sweet, with a faint tang, but not the bitter punch you expect from coffee. The bitterness comes later, once roasting unlocks those hidden oils. At this point, coffee is just a berry, harmless, bright, almost innocent. It's the humans who turn it into a late-night survival potion. You imagine carrying a satchel of these cherries, the way travelers might have done, using them to stay alert on long treks. Instead of an energy drink rattling in your bag, you just chew berries when your eyelids sag. Practical, low-tech, and no plastic waste. Nearby, you watch farmers tending terraced plots. They know their land well, shaping the slopes into steps to hold soil and water. The same ingenuity that supports teff for injera bread also helps coffee flourish. You hear laughter and gossip, the rhythm of hoes striking earth, and in the distance, a drumbeat carries through the valley. The sounds of ordinary life blur with the quiet mystery of a plant that will someday captivate the globe. And because this is a sleepy history, you pause to notice small details. The cool touch of damp earth under your fingers, the faint metallic scent of rain on rock, and the way time feels unhurried here. You lean back, almost lulled by goat bells jangling in uneven rhythm. Yet in your half-doze, you realize This berry is going to travel. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually it will be roasted, ground, brewed, and shared in ways no Ethiopian farmer could imagine. It will spark arguments in royal courts, fuel revolutions, inspire poets, and keep more than a few grad students awake past deadlines. But right now, in this quiet place, it is simply a shrub, with goats skipping happily nearby. One more whisper of humor before you drift on. You picture Caldi trying to market his discovery. Introducing goatberry juice, guaranteed to keep you awake through the longest sermons. Somehow, the pitch doesn't land, but the idea never fades. So you keep walking, stepping carefully on uneven stone, carrying with you the smell of roasted berries clinging to your clothes. Beyond these ridges lies the first leap across seas and cultures. But for now, you're still in Ethiopia, still listening to the rustle of leaves and the restless patter of goat hooves. You leave the hillside and wander toward a cluster of stone buildings nestled into the folds of the Ethiopian landscape. The air feels cooler here, shaded by thick walls and tall trees. This is a monastery, a place where silence is more common than chatter, where monks rise at odd hours to chant prayers that echo into the night. You slip inside, following the scent of smoke from a small brazier, and notice a group of men in rough robes huddled around something unfamiliar. Instead of wine goblets or bread, they're passing around steaming bowls filled with a dark, aromatic brew. This is where coffee begins its life not just as a berry, but as a drink. You watch as one monk carefully crushes the roasted beans, the sound like tiny stones cracking. He adds hot water, stirs, and lets it sit. The liquid turns a deep brown, shimmering under the dim light. When he sips, you see his eyes sharpen, his posture straighten, as though the night has suddenly become bearable. You've arrived at the moment when monks discover they can pray longer, chant clearer, and resist sleep by sipping this strange potion. The mainstream historical fact here is that Ethiopian Orthodox Christians are often credited with adapting coffee as a beverage, using it during long nocturnal devotions. It was practical, an aid to stay awake, and also spiritual, a way to sharpen focus for worship. But there's a quirky tidbit that makes you smile. Some stories claim the monks initially disapproved of the beans, tossing them into the fire as dangerous or sinful. Then the smell of roasting beans drifted up, rich and inviting. And suddenly coffee didn't seem so bad after all. It's as if history's greatest drink was discovered by accident twice. Once by goats, then by smoke. Imagine telling the abbot, "Yes, Father, I threw the devil's berry into the fire, but now it smells like breakfast." Historians still argue whether the monastery connection is literal truth or a later embellishment. Some believe coffee spread first through households and trade routes before ever touching sacred lips. Others suggest the monks were simply among the first to formalize the drink. Either way, the image of solemn prayer fueled by jittery energy feels too perfect not to keep alive. You sit on the cool stone floor, sipping your own bowl. The taste is stronger now than the sweet pulp of raw cherries. Bitter, earthy, with a faint smokiness. The warmth spreads through you, tricking your tired body into wakefulness. The chanting around you becomes hypnotic, a steady drone that pairs strangely well with your cup. You let your mind wander, as if you're one of the monks pacing the cloisters. Night stretches long here. Without lamps or smartphones, darkness is heavy, and falling asleep during prayer isn't exactly encouraged. Coffee offers a loophole, a way to honor devotion while gently cheating the body's limits. You picture monks giving each other side-eye, noticing who nods off and who suddenly seems unnaturally alert, wondering if perhaps someone had one cup too many. Step outside, and the night feels alive. The stars shimmer with unusual clarity, the air sharp and cool. Coffee bushes cling to the slopes nearby, their leaves catching moonlight. You think about how this little corner of ritual will someday ripple outward. Right now, it feels intimate, just monks, bowls, and chants. But this habit will seep into villages, markets, and eventually distant continents. You hear laughter from a side room. Apparently, coffee isn't always solemn. Perhaps monks discovered that late-night prayer turned into late-night storytelling, and then into late-night jokes. A medieval Ethiopian sleepover, minus the marshmallows. You wander into the kitchen, where a clay pot simmers over coals. The preparation is rustic but efficient, crushed beans, hot water, maybe a touch of spice if someone feels creative. Later, these methods will evolve into elaborate ceremonies, complete with incense, metal pots, and carefully poured foam. But right now, it's about simplicity, an earthy brew that tastes more like survival than sophistication. The fire crackles, and you notice how the monastery seems both timeless and fragile. These are the first quiet steps toward coffee as ritual, not just snack. And while monks hum their chants, you hear another hum in your imagination, the murmur of future coffee houses, buzzing with energy centuries from now. One of the monks smiles at you, offering another bowl. You take it, your hands warmed by the clay, and sip again. The bitterness is softer this time, maybe because your tongue has adjusted, or maybe because you secretly want it to taste good. You're no longer just visiting a monastery. You're rehearsing for a habit that millions will adopt, one sleepy sip at a time. And because history always carries a wink, you imagine the monks trying to brand this discovery. Holy brew, guaranteed to keep you awake through 3 psalms and a sermon. Somehow, the marketing never catches on, but the drink itself becomes unstoppable. The night stretches, the prayers continue, and you drift between alertness and drowsiness. You've entered the first circle of coffee culture, quiet, sacred, slightly rebellious. And as dawn creeps over the mountains, you realize that this little habit, born of monks and midnight prayers, is about to slip onto ships and cross oceans. But for now, you're content with the steady rhythm of chanting and the comforting heat of your second bowl. You step away from the monastery's cool stone halls and follow a winding path that dips toward the Red Sea. The air grows warmer, heavier, tinged with salt. The hum of insects gives way to the sound of gulls, and in the distance you spot sails rising like teeth against the horizon. Coffee is no longer confined to highland farms or monastic bowls. It's about to climb aboard ships bound for new lands, tucked quietly among spices, incense, and silks. You've reached the moment when beans begin their first true crossing, from Ethiopia into Yemen. The mainstream historical fact here is that by the 15th century, coffee was cultivated and traded in the Yemeni port of Mocha, which would become synonymous with the drink. Yemen transformed coffee from a local curiosity into a global commodity. Farmers transplanted seeds across the narrow strait, adapting them to terraced hills that overlooked the Arabian Sea. These were no accidental goat snacks anymore. They were commercial goods, bundled and shipped with purpose. You walk along the docks. The air reeks of tar, fish, and spice sacks. Traders shout in multiple languages, their robes flapping in the breeze, their ledgers balanced in their hands. Amid cinnamon sticks and peppercorns, coffee sits in burlap sacks. Just another product, not yet the star. You run your fingers over the coarse fabric, imagining the beans inside rattling like tiny promises of sleepless nights. Here comes the quirky tidbit. Some early Yemeni merchants guarded their monopoly fiercely. They allegedly boiled or parched beans before export so outsiders couldn't plant them. It's like selling bananas, but making sure no one else can grow a banana tree. Protective, clever, and a little bit paranoid. Yet somehow, a few raw seeds still slipped through. You picture a nervous sailor tucking one into his pocket, thinking, no one will search me for beans. Historians still argue whether the Ethiopian to Yemen transfer was an organized agricultural project or more of an informal migration of seeds carried by traders and pilgrims. Some scholars suggest Yemeni Sufi mystics demanded steady supplies for their night rituals, creating a demand that structured trade. Others argue it was just another opportunistic crop that happened to catch on. Either way, this tiny hop across the water marked the first step in coffee's world tour. You climb aboard a ship. The deck creaks, ropes groan, sails snap overhead. Crates are stacked like puzzle pieces, and somewhere in the hold, sacks of coffee nestle beside cloves and cardamom. The voyage is not glamorous. You feel the boat pitch and sway, your stomach lurching as waves slap the hull. Salt spray stings your face. You cling to the rail and mutter, I should have stayed with the goats. Yet, the sailors move with practiced ease, chewing dates, sharing jokes, humming tunes to the rhythm of the sea. At night, you stretch out on rough planks and watch stars tremble above. Sleep refuses to come, partly from the rocking, partly from curiosity about those beings below deck. You hear sailors whispering about them, calling them strange seeds that keep you awake. They swap stories. Some say the beans are magical, others say they're dangerous. One jokes that if you grind enough of them, you'll stay awake for a week straight and start conversing with dolphins. You chuckle, though you're not entirely sure he's wrong. The ship finally docks in Yemen. You stagger ashore, legs wobbly, still hearing phantom waves in your ears. The port of Mocha bustles, markets alive with calls and clamor. You wander into a stall where a man ladles out steaming cups of coffee. The brew here is darker, richer, spiced with cardamom. You taste it, and it jolts you. Not violently, just enough to sharpen the edges of the morning. It feels exotic but grounding, a flavor that belongs to the port itself. No wonder Mocha's name will echo for centuries. Around you, trade thrives. Caravans loaded with beans head inland toward Arabia, while ships carry them outward to Egypt, Persia, and beyond. You realize you're witnessing the first spread of coffee into the Islamic world, where it will soon ignite both devotion and debate. Coffee has made its first escape, its first taste of globalization. And of course, you can't resist Araya's side. Imagine the Yemeni customs officer at the dock, sighing as he stamps another cargo slip. More beans? What's so special about beans? Little does he know, his paperwork is sealing coffee's fate as the next obsession of empires. The sea air thickens with heat, the scent of spice clings to your clothes, and the chatter of merchants rises around you. You take another sip of Yemeni coffee, stronger than any you've had before, and feel both restless and oddly calm. The beans have crossed their first boundary. Soon, they'll weave into the fabric of prayer, trade, and empire. For now, though, you're content to sit on a crate at the port of Mocha, cradling your cup, watching sails billow as new voyages begin. You wander deeper into Yemen, leaving behind the salty chaos of Mocha's port. The road winds through dusty hills where camel bells jingle in the distance. At night, faint lanterns flicker from courtyards, and you're drawn toward the rhythmic sound of chanting. Somewhere behind carved wooden doors, the Sufis gather. You slip inside, not as an intruder but as a sleepy guest, welcomed with a steaming cup of something new. The room is low-lit, fragrant with incense. Carpets soften your steps, and the air trembles with voices reciting prayers in a steady cadence. The drink passed around is coffee, infused with cardamom, poured from elegant brass pots. You take a cautious sip. It's rich, spiced, and unexpectedly smooth, a warmth that seems to trickle into your very bones. Suddenly, the idea of staying awake through the long hours of devotion doesn't feel so impossible. The mainstream historical fact here is that Sufi mystics embraced coffee as a tool for extended prayer and meditation. By the 15th century, it had become a central element of their gatherings. Coffee houses were not yet a thing. Instead, the drink lived in these spiritual and semi-private circles. In a sense, coffee was first a companion for the soul before it became a social pastime. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some Sufi orders are said to have danced or swayed during their ceremonies, letting coffee heighten their energy as they chanted. Imagine the scene: half-lit rooms filled with rhythmic movement, voices rising, and somewhere in the background, someone quietly refilling cups. If you've ever seen a caffeine-fueled karaoke night, it's not that different, just with fewer microphones and more mysticism. Historians still argue whether coffee was universally accepted in these circles or if it sparked internal debate. Some accounts describe critics claiming the drink was intoxicating, too stimulating for spiritual purity. Others argue it was harmless, a natural aid like bread or water. The tension between coffee as sacred helper or suspicious indulgence would echo for centuries, reaching even the Ottoman courts later on. For now, though, you sit among the Sufis. The chanting envelopes you, a low vibration in your chest, steady as a drumbeat. The scent of frankincense mingles with coffee's earthy aroma. You close your eyes and feel time slow, your body grounded while your mind hovers just above the present. Every sip sharpens the sensation. Someone beside you leans over, whispering that the drink comes from across the sea, a foreign berry tamed by local hands. You glance down at your cup, thinking about the narrow strait you crossed, realizing how small distances can change history. A few hundred miles, a handful of seeds, and suddenly you're part of a ritual that will ripple outward like a pebble tossed in a pond. The chants rise louder, faster. The group sways, robes rustling, feet tapping softly against the carpet. You're caught in the rhythm, half prayer, half music, and the coffee in your veins beats like a second pulse. In this dim, smoky room, you feel the birth of something beyond mere sustenance. Coffee is becoming culture, performance, even identity. Step outside, and the night air feels cool against your flushed skin. The stars above Yemen blaze with impossible brightness. In the alley, someone grinds beans with a stone mortar, the sound echoing like distant drums. You realize the drink isn't confined to monasteries or mystics anymore. It's spilling into streets, into families, into trade networks. And because you can't resist a sleepy smile, you imagine a Sufi marketing pitch, guaranteed to keep you awake for all-night chanting or, failing that, your cousin's endless wedding speeches. Somehow, the idea feels both ancient and very modern. You linger in the courtyard, finishing the last of your cup. The world feels balanced between devotion and drowsiness, between earth and spirit. Coffee is no longer just a berry or a tool, it's a bridge. And as you set down your cup, you know the bridge will soon stretch further, carrying this humble drink from Yemen's Sufi nights to the heart of empires waiting just across the horizon. The road winds north, away from Yemen's hills and across deserts where sand shifts like waves under the wind. You trudge along caravan trails, passing camels burdened with sacks of coffee. Their bells clink in hypnotic rhythm, and the thought amuses you. These animals don't realize they're carrying the very drink that will keep countless humans awake for centuries to come. Beyond the dunes lies a city where east meets west, where merchants haggle as fiercely as emperors plot. You arrive in Istanbul, the beating heart of the Ottoman world. The air is alive with smells, roasted meats, sweet syrups, smoke, spices, and something new drifting from small stalls. You pause in front of a vendor pouring thick, black liquid into tiny porcelain cups. The brew bubbles in a long-handled copper pot, frothing as he tips it forward. This is your first Ottoman coffee, and it's unlike anything before. Rich, unfiltered, intense, as if the drink itself were condensed history in liquid form. The mainstream historical fact: under the Ottomans, coffee houses blossomed in the 16th century. These were not just cafes but hubs of conversation, music, and debate. Known as kavahan, they became central to urban life. Men gathered to share news, play games like backgammon, recite poetry, and plot schemes, political or otherwise. Coffee had shifted from spiritual aid to social glue. But here's your quirky tidbit. Some Ottoman sultans grew wary of coffee houses, fearing they were breeding grounds for dissent. At least one ruler ordered them closed, while another supposedly disguised himself to sneak inside and listen. Picture a mighty sultan lurking in the corner, pretending to sip his cup quietly, ears pricked for gossip. It's as if your boss decided to spy on your group chat by buying everyone a latte. Historians still argue whether the state's suspicion was overblown or justified. Some say coffee houses truly stirred rebellion. Others believe they were simply convenient scapegoats for broader unrest. What's certain is that coffee became political, whether anyone wanted it to or not. You sit inside a crowded Ottoman cafe. The air is thick with smoke from pipes, the chatter constant. Someone strums a lute in the corner, plucking soft notes while dice clatter on a board. A storyteller begins a tale of sultans, battles, and enchanted gardens, his voice rising and falling as cups clink and laughter bursts. You sip your own coffee. It coats your tongue, bitter and sweet at once. No sugar yet, just raw, potent strength. It's less a drink and more a statement. I'm awake, I'm alert, and I have opinions. Step outside into the bustling streets. Coffee sellers balance trays of cups as they weave through crowds. Roasters fill the air with a nutty, smoky perfume. The city itself seems caffeinated, its energy sharper, quicker, buzzing like a hive. You realize coffee is no longer a hidden ritual. It's a spectacle, a habit, a public stage. And because sleep-friendly humor is irresistible, you picture an Ottoman pamphlet warning citizens. Beware. Excessive coffee may lead to poetry, opinions, and late-night dice games. Honestly, that sounds less like a threat and more like a fun weekend. The call to prayer floats over the rooftops, steady and grounding. Crowds move, some toward mosques, others back into coffee houses. The drink has woven itself into both sacred rhythm and secular habit, threading across Istanbul's days and nights. As the sun sets, the golden horn glimmers, and you watch shadows lengthen across the domes and minarets. You cradle another small cup, letting its heat seep into your palms. Coffee has traveled far already, but here in the Ottoman capital, it has reached a kind of stage. It is visible, audible, argued over and adored. And from here, the ripple will spread again, through smugglers, traders, and stubborn dreamers, carrying the drink into entirely new worlds. For now, though, you lean back on a cushion, lulled by lute music, chatter, and the warmth of roasted beans. Istanbul hums around you, and you drift, half alert, half dreaming, knowing that the world's first true coffee craze has just begun. You shuffle down the narrow lanes of Istanbul, past coffee stalls spilling steam into the chilly dawn. Merchants haggle, scribes dip pens into ink, and a storyteller warms his throat with a sip before launching into another tale. But behind the lively buzz, whispers drift. Not everyone is supposed to have these beans. You lean closer to hear. The Ottomans want to protect their treasure, guarding raw seeds like a dragon hoarding gold. Coffee has become too valuable, too central, to let slip away unchecked. The mainstream historical fact is that for a time, authorities tried to enforce strict control over coffee's export. Roasted beans were fine, they couldn't sprout. But raw seeds, fertile, living, were forbidden to leave. Mocha in Yemen and Istanbul in Turkey held on to their coffee monopoly with both hands, ensuring profits and prestige flowed back to the empire. And yet, here comes the quirky tidbit. Smugglers found creative ways to sneak seeds out. Some tucked them in robes, others concealed them in camel loads, and a few, more daring, are said to have strapped them under turbans. Picture a guard pulling aside a suspicious traveler, only to find him sweating not from guilt, but from the literal hot beans pressing against his scalp. A terrible hat, but a bold move. Historians still argue whether the most famous smuggling tale is true, the one about Baba Budan, the Indian pilgrim who supposedly carried 7 raw seeds from Yemen back to southern India in the 1600s. Some say it's folklore, others swear it's fact. Either way, the story has stuck, and coffee plantations in India still nod to him as their unlikely patron saint of smuggling. You follow one such caravan, plodding along dusty routes under a blistering sun. The sacks on the camel's sides rattle with beans, some roasted, some maybe not. Traders grin, wink, and say nothing. They know the profit is worth the risk. You imagine what it must feel like, carrying a plant so small it fits in your pocket, yet so powerful it could topple a monopoly. At a campfire, smugglers roast flatbread, chew dates, and laugh about how much trouble they'd be in if caught. One jokes that the penalty is worse than missing a night's sleep without coffee, which, if you've ever pulled an all-nighter, sounds about right. The stars spread above you, and you realize that what feels like a petty theft today is actually history reshaping itself. Without these daring couriers, coffee would remain bottled up in Ottoman domains, never planting roots across Asia or the Americas. Morning breaks, and you find yourself standing in a small garden outside a home in southern India. Sprouts push through the soil, tiny, tender, bright green. These are the escaped beans, adjusting to their new home. A farmer waters them carefully, unaware that in a few centuries, India will export tons of coffee to the world. The plants sway lightly, as if proud of their clandestine journey. Back in Istanbul, the monopoly may still look intact, but cracks are forming. Traders gossip, seeds slip, and foreign merchants circle like seagulls over a fish market. The empire can try, but it cannot stop curiosity, greed, and the stubborn persistence of humans who want just one more cup. And because your sleepy brain loves a chuckle, you imagine a wanted poster nailed to a coffeehouse wall. Beware of suspicious men carrying extra lumpy turbans. Reward: 1 lifetime supply of confiscated beans. Somehow, you suspect most of the patrons would turn a blind eye. The smell of roasting fills your nose again. You cradle a small cup, stronger than you need, and let the warmth seep into your hands. The sip is bitter, smoky, full of hidden journeys. Each drop carries the taste of secrecy, of caravans, of men who risked much for little seeds. And as you drift, you realize this is coffee's true nature: to slip boundaries, to defy borders, to spill wherever humans crave wakefulness and company. You leave behind the dusty roads of caravans and smugglers and drift north and west, where the salty wind of the Mediterranean greets you again. The ship you board this time feels sturdier, its hull stacked with sacks of beans and barrels of oil. The sailors joke that the cargo smells like burned almonds, but they don't care as long as the merchants in Venice pay well. You sway with the creak of ropes, watching gulls circle overhead. Somewhere on this deck lies the first true taste of Europe's long love affair with coffee. The mainstream historical fact: Venice was one of the earliest European ports to receive coffee in the late 16th century. Through trade with Ottoman merchants, the city's wealthy elite sampled the drink, suspicious at first but intrigued. By the early 1600s, Venetian doctors and priests debated whether it was medicine or menace. Apothecaries sold it for its supposed health benefits, claiming it cured everything from headaches to stomach woes. It wasn't cheap, just one tiny cup cost as much as a small meal. You wander into a Venetian apothecary, the shelves lined with glass jars full of herbs, powders, and dried roots. Behind the counter, a man in a tall hat grinds coffee beans with exaggerated seriousness. He insists this potion strengthens the liver, brightens the complexion, and he lowers his voice, aids certain marital obligations. You raise your eyebrows, sip politely, and try not to choke on the bitterness. The quirky tidbit here: when coffee first arrived, some Venetians worried it was the devil's drink, since it came from Muslim lands. The story goes that Pope Clement VIII was asked to condemn it. Instead, after tasting it, he declared, "This drink of the devil is so delicious that it would be a shame to let the infidels have exclusive use of it." He supposedly blessed coffee, ensuring Catholics could enjoy it guilt-free. Imagine a papal thumbs up delivered between sips, one of history's strangest product endorsements. Historians still argue whether the Pope's blessing story is literal truth or a colorful legend. Some documents suggest it was invented later, once coffee had already taken root in Europe. But whether real or not, the tale captures the tension of the moment. Coffee straddled the line between suspicion and desire, foreignness and familiarity. You stroll through the narrow Venetian streets, past canals glimmering under lanterns. At a noble's house, guests recline on cushions as a servant brings tiny porcelain cups. They sip slowly, murmuring about trade, politics, and the strange bitterness of this new drink. Some wrinkle their noses, insisting wine is better. Others smile knowingly, savoring the sharp clarity that follows a swallow. At the docks, sailors unload more sacks, the beans spilling like pebbles onto the planks. You bend to scoop one up. It's small, dark, and wrinkled, hardly glamorous, yet it carries within it the potential to overturn habits across a continent. You roll it in your palm and feel as though you're holding a seed of quiet rebellion. And since no sleepy tale is complete without a little wink, you imagine Venetian taverns putting up signs. Wine for laughter, coffee for staying awake during your uncle's endless stories. Both useful in their own way. The city hums around you. Gondolas glide through canals. Laughter carries from balconies. Bells toll from church towers. You sip another tiny cup, this one sweetened with honey to soften the bitterness. The warmth spreads through you, mingling with the salty air, the chatter of traders, and the faint strains of music drifting from an open window. Coffee has survived suspicion, smuggling, and sermons. Now, in Venice, it has found a new stage: the parlor, the pharmacy, the church. The beans have crossed not only seas, but cultural boundaries, reshaping rituals one cup at a time. And as you sit by the canal, watching the moon shimmer on the water, you know Europe has just taken its first hesitant sip, soon to become a gulp, then a lifelong craving. You wander further west, the salt of Venice still clinging to your clothes, until you find yourself in a smoky, bustling room somewhere in 17th century London. The wooden beams creak overhead, the rush-covered floor crunches underfoot, and the air smells like a mix of ink, wet wool, and something sharp, almost burnt. It isn't ale in the mugs tonight, it's coffee, and the whole room hums with restless conversation. The mainstream historical fact: by the 1650s, London had embraced coffee houses. Known as penny universities, they charged 1 penny for entry, which bought you a cup of coffee and access to debate, gossip, news, and ideas. Scientists scribbled notes in the corners, merchants struck deals across sticky tables, and newspapers were born here. Ink still drying as readers passed them from hand to hand. You step inside one such house, brushing rain from your cloak. The keeper nods as you drop your coin, handing you a steaming bowl of coffee. It's bitter, a little gritty, but strangely energizing. You sip and listen. At one table, men argue about trade routes. At another, someone mutters about a comet spotted in the sky. A group of young writers, hair unruly, scribble half poems and laugh too loudly. This is less a cafe than a thunderstorm of words. Now for your quirky tidbit. Coffee houses had reputations for mischief. Some gained nicknames like the Turk's Head or Wolf's Coffee House, attracting actors, poets, or political firebrands. Others were infamous for conspiracy whispers. So much so that King Charles II once tried to ban them, claiming they were seminaries of sedition. The ban lasted about as long as your New Year's resolution to cut sugar. Public outrage forced him to back down within days. Londoners weren't giving up their gossip and caffeine so easily. Historians still argue whether these coffee houses truly fueled revolutions or simply gave people a place to air grievances. Some scholars see them as engines of the Enlightenment. Others think they were mostly glorified rumor mills. Either way, you can't deny their electricity. This sense that over one hot cup, the world might tilt. You squeeze into a bench, the wood sticky from spilled brew. Across from you sits a man in a powdered wig, explaining to anyone who will listen that Newton's theories prove God's existence. He gestures wildly, nearly spilling his drink, while the person beside him counters with equal passion. You're caught between wanting to nap and wanting to shout, "Gentlemen, please, it's past midnight." Some of us are trying to doze off to history here. In the corner, someone reads aloud from a fresh pamphlet. It's filled with half-truths, speculation, and bold headlines. You chuckle, realizing you're basically watching the first clickbait in print form. Comet sighted, world to end, one line declares. Another promises shocking secrets of the Dutch East India Company. Sound familiar? Some things never change. You step outside for air, rain pattering on cobblestones. Even out here, men cluster under awnings, arguing and trading whispers. Coffee has turned London into a hive of restless chatter. Taverns still thrive, of course, but here the drink is different. It sharpens rather than dulls, provokes rather than soothes. You feel the city itself vibrating, caught between drowsy fog and caffeinated clarity. And because this is bedtime history, you can't resist imagining a sleepy sign outside the door. Warning: coffee may cause revolutionary thoughts, excessive poetry, and minor marital disputes. Hardly a deterrent, if anything, an invitation. You take another sip, the grit sticking to your teeth, and feel a peculiar mix of irritation and energy. This is not the smooth coffee of Ottoman parlors. It's raw, unfiltered, and a little chaotic, just like London itself. But there's no denying its pull. The Penny University is open all night, and every muttered debate, every scribbled pamphlet, every nervous laugh over steaming mugs is a thread weaving into the fabric of modern society. As the hour grows late, the rain eases. Lamps flicker, smoke drifts, and the city breathes in rhythm with its coffee houses. You linger a moment longer, warmed by your cup, amused by the chaos, and oddly comforted by the thought that even revolutions, in their earliest stirrings, begin not with muskets, but with murmurs over mugs. The London coffee house air still clings to your cloak as you wander into quieter streets. The shouting of pamphleteers fades behind you, but the echo of their words follows: complaints, accusations, hopes, and warnings. Coffee may be buzzing in Europe, but not everyone is thrilled about it. In fact, you find yourself leafing through one of those pamphlets, its bold title practically yelling at you: The Women's Petition Against Coffee. The mainstream historical fact: in 1674, a group of London women published a pamphlet complaining that coffee was ruining their marriages. Their husbands, they argued, spent all their time at coffee houses instead of at home. Worse, the drink supposedly left them weak, dull, and distracted. The petition described coffee as a newfangled, abominable, heathenish liquor that dried up a man's vigor and turned him into, well, a bore. You chuckle because it's one of history's earliest "my husband won't stop hanging out with his buddies" rants. You imagine standing in a London kitchen where women whisper their grievances. A kettle boils, bread cools on the hearth, and one of them sighs. Ever since he discovered that blasted coffee, he hasn't looked at me the same way. He stares into his cup as though it's a mirror of the universe. They giggle, but the frustration is real. Now for your quirky tidbit. The men fired back almost immediately with their own pamphlet, grandly titled The Men's Answer to the Women's Petition Against Coffee. In it, they insisted coffee actually improved their health and stamina. Wink, wink, and made them more pleasant companions. You can almost hear the sarcastic quill scratching. Ladies, please, this drink makes us more able in every sense. It's basically a 17th century version of a Twitter argument, complete with exaggerated claims and passive-aggressive tone. Historians still argue whether this pamphlet war reflected genuine social tension or was more of a tongue-in-cheek pamphlet marketing ploy. Some believe it was propaganda pushed by tavern owners, who feared coffee houses were stealing their customers. Others think it was satire blown out of proportion. Either way, it shows just how disruptive a simple drink had become in daily life. You stroll past a coffee house now, peeking through the fogged glass. Inside, men lean over tables, cups steaming as they mutter about politics. A woman outside tugs at her husband's sleeve, urging him to come home. He waves her off. Just one more debate about Dutch trade policies. Dear, I'll be home before dawn. You sigh, realizing that coffee didn't just fuel conversation, it reshaped household rhythms. And here's your joke for the night. Imagine a medieval version of Tinder, but instead of swiping left or right, you just check whether someone spends too much time at the coffee house. Red flag, loves pamphlets more than people. Green flag, brews at home. You continue along cobbled streets, the pamphlet crinkling in your hand. Street lamps flicker, casting long shadows on wet stone. Somewhere, a printer presses more copies of complaints and rebuttals, the ink thick and fresh. The words will spread tomorrow, stirring laughter, outrage, or curiosity. The debate over coffee isn't just about flavor or fashion. It's about gender roles, about the shifting balance of home and public life, about who gets to control leisure. For women shut out of the smoky rooms, coffee symbolized exclusion. For men, it was camaraderie, intellectual sparring, and a chance to reinvent themselves. You fold the pamphlet, tuck it into your cloak, and keep walking. The city hums around you, restless, caffeinated, and just a little petty. And you, drifting in the middle of it all, smile at how much drama can pour from something as small as a cup of bitter black brew. Your cloak is damp from London drizzle as you follow the trail of beans far beyond Europe's foggy streets. The sacks of coffee don't just stay in Venetian pharmacies or London coffee houses. They become stowaways on ships bound for distant colonies. You find yourself at a crowded dock, the smell of tar and salt heavy in the air. Sailors grunt as they hoist barrels onto decks. Somewhere in the chaos, among the sugar and spices, tiny seedlings sit in wooden boxes, coffee plants, about to become pawns of empire. The mainstream historical fact: by the late 17th and early 18th centuries, colonial powers spread coffee cultivation outside of Arabia. The Dutch smuggled beans to Java, in today's Indonesia, establishing vast plantations. The French carried seedlings to the Caribbean, where Saint-Domingue, modern Haiti, briefly became the world's top producer. The Portuguese set up cultivation in Brazil, which would eventually dominate global supply. The story of coffee from this point on isn't just about taste. It's about empire, slavery, and massive global trade. You sail across the Indian Ocean, past green islands dotted with palms. On Java, Dutch officials boast about their new plantations. Rows upon rows of young coffee trees stretch under the humid sky. Workers toil in silence, their hands stained from soil and sap. The overseer beams, announcing this is the future, Europe's breakfast in a cup, grown thousands of miles away. The quirky tidbit: one of the most famous legends involves a French naval officer named Gabriel de Clou. In the 1720s, he supposedly smuggled a coffee plant from Paris to Martinique. The tale goes that on the voyage, he shared his limited drinking water with the fragile seedling, protecting it from storms and jealous crew. Thanks to his dedication, the Caribbean plantations flourished. Was this a heroic act of devotion to coffee, or just a really dramatic gardener? Historians still argue whether Decleu's tale is embellished or entirely true, but it lives on as one of the most romantic plant smuggling stories ever told. Back on the deck, the sea sprays your face, and you imagine the captain scolding, "Stop hugging that shrub, sailor. You'll look ridiculous in the ship's log." Still, the story works. It captures the sense of obsession coffee inspired. Historians still argue whether colonial coffee success was inevitable or if it depended on a handful of accidents, storms, pests, even wars that shifted where beans could grow. Some believe Brazil's dominance was luck of geography. Others point to brutal efficiency and exploitation. The debate isn't settled, but one thing is clear: coffee's spread was never gentle. You step onto a Caribbean shore now, the air thick with sugarcane smoke. In the fields, enslaved workers cut, haul, and sort coffee cherries, their labor feeding the cravings of Europe's parlors. The contrast is jarring. You, a sleepy traveler with a steaming cup, and they, sweating under the sun, unseen by the wealthy drinkers abroad. Yet the world is now hooked. By the mid-18th century, European demand is insatiable. Ships sail in steady rhythm, beans one way, profits the other. Coffee houses in London, Paris, and Amsterdam swell with chatter, each cup tied invisibly to the backs of workers thousands of miles away. To lighten the mood, you picture an early advertisement on a Caribbean dock. "Try our beans, grown with extra sunshine, sprinkled with a dash of piracy." Effective branding, if not entirely accurate. As the day cools, you walk through the plantation rows. The glossy leaves of the trees catch the fading light. The red cherries glisten like tiny jewels. The air is heavy, but the scene is undeniably beautiful in its own way. You pluck a cherry, roll it between your fingers, and think of all the places it might go. A Paris salon, a London alley, a Viennese cafe. One little fruit, countless destinies. The ship bells ring again. Another journey waits. You step aboard, watching the shoreline blur. The waves rock you gently, and you realize coffee has become unstoppable, not just a drink, but an empire on the move. The ship that carried you from the Caribbean drops anchor along the French coast, and you wander inland, where Paris hums with something more refined than London's chaotic coffee houses. Here, the beans are not just boiled and gulped. They are staged, styled, and savored, the way only the French could manage. You step through the ornate doors of a salon, where the air is thick with perfume, powdered wigs, and, yes, the unmistakable smell of freshly brewed coffee. The mainstream historical fact: by the mid-17th century, coffee was a fixture in Paris, especially in aristocratic salons. One of the most famous promoters was Pasqua Rossi, who opened a coffee house in London before moving to Paris. Soon, Parisian high society adopted the drink, serving it in delicate porcelain cups. By the 18th century, it became fuel for the Enlightenment, sipped by Voltaire, Rousseau, and Diderot as they debated philosophy, science, and politics. Voltaire reportedly drank as many as 40 cups a day, which makes you wonder if he ever slept, or simply vibrated through history like a caffeinated ghost. You settle onto a gilded chair, a servant pouring steaming coffee into porcelain decorated with tiny blue flowers. The lady of the house, a towering presence in a dress that could double as a tent, smiles as she invites you to join the discussion. Around you, men and women trade ideas on liberty, reason, and literature. The clink of cups mixes with sharp laughter and the scratch of quills. Now for your quirky tidbit. Fashionable Parisians sometimes added extravagant ingredients to their coffee. One recipe suggested mixing it with mustard and cloves, another with orange blossom water. Imagine trying to impress your friends by serving mustard latte. You politely sip, trying not to grimace, while everyone else nods approvingly, insisting it's the height of sophistication. Historians still argue whether coffee truly fueled the Enlightenment or whether it was simply a fashionable accessory to gatherings that would have happened anyway. Some say the stimulant effect encouraged sharper debates. Others argue wine had long done the same. Either way, it's hard to picture Voltaire rattling off quips without a cup or three within reach. You stroll through the Palais Royal, where one of the earliest Parisian cafes, Café de Procope, still bustles. Inside, young revolutionaries and poets rub shoulders with aristocrats. The walls are lined with mirrors and candlelight, the air buzzing with ideas. Someone recites verses, another critiques them mercilessly, and you sip quietly, thankful no one is asking you to rhyme on command. To keep the tone playful, you imagine Voltaire trying to order coffee at a modern cafe. Yes, I'll take 40 espressos, please, in one cup, and make it quick. I have 3 revolutions to start before lunch. The barista faints on the spot. Paris itself seems to shimmer in this caffeinated glow. Horse-drawn carriages clatter past boulevards, vendors call out wares, and everywhere, someone is carrying a small porcelain cup as if it were a fashion statement. Coffee has become more than a drink here. It's a symbol of intellect, of modernity, of being part of something bigger. The candles in the salon burn lower as the conversation drifts from metaphysics to gossip, from politics to poetry. You lean back, warmed by the drink, lulled by the rhythm of voices. The Parisian night stretches on, each cup a spark feeding fires that will soon leap beyond philosophy into revolution. The Parisian salon fades behind you like a dream, but the scent of coffee still lingers as you step into a more turbulent century. The air grows heavy, banners wave in the streets, and you can almost hear drums echoing in the distance. Coffee is no longer just a fashionable drink. It has become a companion in revolution. The mainstream historical fact: in both the American and French revolutions, coffee replaced traditional social drinks. In the American colonies, patriots famously rejected tea after the Boston Tea Party of 1773, turning instead to coffee as a beverage of defiance against British taxation. Across the Atlantic, French revolutionaries sipped coffee in crowded cafes as they debated liberty, equality, and fraternity. Coffee houses like the Café de Foy became meeting grounds for fiery speeches and bold plans. You picture yourself in Boston, a chilly morning in the 1770s. A tavern smells of wood smoke and fresh coffee, the mugs plain and sturdy. A group of colonists huddle around a table, muttering about taxes and royal decrees. One man raises his cup and declares, "No more tea. From now on, coffee is the drink of a free people." Everyone cheers, though one poor soul whispers, "But I really liked Earl Grey." You pat him on the back. "Sorry, friend, liberty comes with bitter beans." Now for the quirky tidbit. During the French Revolution, some radical clubs supposedly mixed coffee with brandy to stay alert during long debates. Imagine guzzling that concoction, half stimulant, half sedative, like an 18th century energy drink. You'd be both hyped and horizontal at the same time. Someone probably fell asleep mid-slogan, face first in their cup. Historians still argue whether coffee houses truly drove revolutionary fervor or simply mirrored it. Did the cafes spark action, or were they just convenient gathering spots where ideas already brewing spilled over? Either way, the symbolism stuck. Tea meant loyalty to kings. Coffee meant change, risk, and the possibility of a new world. You step now into Paris, July 1789. The Café de Foy bustles, the air thick with excitement and fear. A man leaps onto a chair, waving his hat, his voice ringing out. "To arms, citizens!" The crowd erupts, mugs raised, voices blending with the distant thunder of feet in the streets. The Bastille waits only blocks away. You sip your coffee slowly, savoring the odd calm before history turns. And because this is bedtime storytelling, let's sprinkle in a gentle joke. Imagine revolutionaries today using a Starbucks rewards card. "Congratulations, citizen. After 5 guillotines, you've earned a free espresso." Not exactly the kind of loyalty program you'd want. The revolutions pass, but coffee remains. The beans do not care about banners or slogans. They slip easily from one regime to the next, always ready to fuel the chatter, the plotting, the dreaming. Whether in a smoky Boston tavern or a feverish Paris cafe, the ritual is the same. Lift cup, sip, talk, scheme, repeat. Night settles again as you wander down cobbled streets, the echoes of chants fading. You cradle your cup, watching the steam curl upward. Coffee has traveled far, and now it carries the taste of liberty on its bitter tongue. The chants of revolution fade into the hum of pistons, the hiss of steam, and the clatter of factory wheels. You step into the 19th century, where the Industrial Revolution roars like a restless beast. Coal smoke blackens the air, whistles pierce the morning, and men and women hurry down crowded streets to factories that demand their hours and their strength. And in the midst of all this noise, you spot a small cart on a corner, steam curling from a battered kettle. Yes, coffee has followed you here too, though now it's less about salons and revolutions and more about survival on long shifts. The mainstream historical fact: during the Industrial Revolution, coffee became a vital working-class drink across Europe and America. Street vendors sold it cheaply by the mug, sometimes from stalls known as coffee stands or coffee taverns. These humble spots kept laborers awake during early mornings and soothed them after grueling nights. Coffee was affordable, practical, and, unlike alcohol, didn't impair work. Some reformers even pushed it as a moral alternative to gin, which they blamed for urban misery. You approach one of these stalls, the wood damp from drizzle. The vendor, scarf wrapped tight against the soot, hands you a steaming tin cup. It tastes rough, burnt even, but it cuts through the fog of fatigue. Workers huddle close, their faces lined but their spirits lifted by warmth and caffeine. A penny buys them not philosophy but alertness, a little fuel to endure the day's grind. Here's your quirky tidbit. In London, the coffee stall keepers often served their brews with thick slabs of bread and butter, so customers called it coffee and a slice. Imagine a half-sleepy Victorian worker muttering, "One coffee and a slice, please," like today's one latte and a muffin. Street food culture, just with more soot and fewer Instagram photos. Historians still argue whether coffee truly improved working-class health and productivity, or if it simply masked exhaustion. Some point to its role in reducing alcohol consumption. Others note it may have allowed factories to push longer hours without protest. The truth likely lies somewhere between, a bitter drink for a bitter reality, but also a small comfort. You follow the workers into a factory yard. Machines roar so loudly you can feel the vibrations in your chest. Men haul coal, women feed threads into whirring looms, children dart between machines carrying spindles. In the corner, someone sneaks a sip from a tin cup, hiding it from the overseer. The drink doesn't change the harshness, but it makes the morning bearable. And since even soot-filled history deserves a joke, imagine if industrial bosses had invented a loyalty program. Survive 10 shifts without losing a finger, get your 11th coffee free. Somehow, you don't think it would catch on. The day wears on. Smoke thickens, whistles shriek, and the streets overflow with workers. Coffee stalls dot every corner now, little islands of warmth in a sea of gray. Some even evolve into coffee palaces, temperance-friendly establishments where tea and coffee are served in grand halls, meant to lure people away from gin shops. You wander into one, polished wood, high ceilings, not a drop of alcohol in sight. The crowd is lively but not rowdy, voices buzzing with sober energy. The industrial age isn't glamorous. It's exhausting, smoky, and often harsh. But here, amid steam and soot, coffee proves itself again. No longer just a luxury of nobles or a spark for revolutionaries, but a daily necessity for workers who need to push through endless shifts. As evening falls, you cradle one last tin cup, watching the glow of gas lamps flicker across brick walls. The city never sleeps now, and thanks to coffee, neither do you. At least not until the story quiets enough for your eyes to drift shut. The factory whistles fade behind you, and when you next open your eyes, the soot and smoke have lifted. You're standing in a Victorian parlor, where the air is gentler, perfumed with rosewater and a faint trace of polished wood. Lace curtains soften the daylight, portraits stare down from walls, and at the center of it all sits a gleaming coffee pot, plump, shiny, and looking far more fashionable than the tin mugs of the street. The mainstream historical fact: in the 19th century, coffee became firmly entrenched in middle-class domestic life. It wasn't just a worker's pick-me-up anymore. It was a staple of polite society. Families bought porcelain sets, delicate cups, and silver spoons, turning coffee into a ritual of hospitality. The Victorians, famous for their gadgets and innovations, also invented new brewing devices, percolators, vacuum pots, and later, elaborate espresso prototypes. The parlor became a stage, and coffee the star prop. You step closer to admire the contraptions. A lady in a high-collared gown demonstrates a balancing siphon brewer, two glass globes connected by a thin tube, resting on a polished stand. She pours water into one, places it over a spirit lamp, and as the pressure builds, the water rises dramatically into the upper globe to mingle with the grounds. After a minute, the liquid descends again, leaving behind an elegant cup of coffee. The guests applaud as though they've just witnessed a magic trick. You clap politely too, even though part of you wants to whisper, "You know you could just boil water, right?" Here's your quirky tidbit. Victorians were so gadget-obsessed that some coffee pots came with built-in music boxes. Imagine a percolator cheerfully chiming a tune while it brewed. A pleasant touch for some, but probably maddening if you hadn't had your caffeine yet. Yes, kettle, I know it's morning. Stop playing God Save the Queen while I'm still half asleep. Historians still argue whether these domestic rituals reflected genuine love of coffee or more of a middle-class desire to show refinement. Was the taste central, or was it the ceremony? The clinking porcelain, the polished silver, the demonstration of taste? Either way, the performance turned coffee into an elegant marker of identity. You sink into a velvet chair as a butler offers you a cup on a saucer. The porcelain is so thin you can see the light glowing through it. You sip slowly. The brew is smoother than the bitter stall coffee from the factories, though perhaps not as thrilling as the chaotic cups of London. Still, there's something calming in this rhythm, polished, practiced, rehearsed like a waltz. To keep the mood playful, imagine a Victorian advertisement bragging, "Our new coffee pot guarantees proper extraction, dignity, and the faint approval of your mother-in-law." Quite the selling point. You stroll around the parlor, noting the knickknacks on mantels, the ticking of the clock, the soft murmur of conversation. Guests laugh politely at jokes, ladies adjust their gloves, men debate novels and parliamentary news. Coffee sits at the center of it all, its aroma weaving through lace and laughter. Beyond the parlor, you glimpse shop windows filled with imported beans and polished equipment. Coffee has become a household necessity, not just a public spectacle. The industrial world outside is still smoky, still rough, but here the drink is domesticated, softened, turned into something that belongs to family and hearth. The lamps grow brighter as evening falls. You sip your final porcelain cup, savoring its warmth, before setting it gently back on its saucer with the faintest clink. In this room of velvet and lace, coffee feels less like rebellion or survival and more like ritual, a polite anchor in a fast-changing world. The velvet parlors fade, and you drift gently into the 20th century, where the world seems to speed up and spread out all at once. Cities swell with cars and electric lights, radios hum in kitchens, and coffee finds itself woven into a rhythm that feels almost ordinary. Not a novelty, not a scandal, not even a luxury anymore, but a quiet companion to mornings and meetings, workdays and weekends. The mainstream historical fact: by the 20th century, coffee had become a truly global commodity. Brazil emerged as the dominant supplier, producing nearly 80% of the world's beans at its peak. Meanwhile, instant coffee was invented, first patented in the early 1900s, with Nestlé's Nescafé becoming a household name by the 1930s. Soldiers carried packets of it into both world wars, sipping it from tin mugs in muddy trenches and desert camps. After the wars, coffee consumption surged in everyday life, from American diners pouring bottomless cups to European cafes perfecting espresso. You wander through a diner in 1950s America, the neon sign buzzing faintly. Vinyl booths squeak as customers slide in, and the waitress pours cup after cup without pausing, the glass pot never seeming to empty. The coffee here isn't delicate or refined. It's strong, slightly burnt, endlessly refilled. A trucker nurses his third mug before heading back to the highway. A couple of teenagers share a milkshake at the counter, and somewhere near the jukebox, two workers argue about baseball stats between sips. Coffee, in this world, is as common as breathing. The quirky tidbit: in the 1960s, NASA even experimented with freeze-dried coffee for astronauts, served in squeezed tubes. Imagine sipping bitter brown paste while floating in zero gravity, trying not to let droplets escape and clog the equipment. Houston, we have a spill doesn't quite carry the same drama as the original line. Historians still argue whether instant coffee democratized the drink or cheapened it. Some say it brought coffee into every household, convenient and affordable. Others insist it stripped away the ritual, turning something rich and cultural into bland powder. As always, the truth lies in the middle. Instant coffee kept the world awake when convenience mattered most, while cafes preserved the artistry for those who sought it. You drift into a European square now, where the espresso machine hisses like a dragon. The barista pulls a shot, golden crema crowning the cup. Patrons lean against counters, sipping quickly before rushing back into their day. It feels brisk, efficient, but also deeply communal. The ritual of standing shoulder to shoulder, cups clinking, chatter rising above the steam. To soften this with a little joke, imagine a World War II soldier trying to describe instant coffee to his grandmother back home. It's like coffee, but sadder, faster, and comes in a tin. She shakes her head, muttering that nothing good ever comes from powders. The decades roll by. Coffee becomes advertising slogans, jingles on the radio, logos on billboards. It's in thermoses on commuter trains, in styrofoam cups at office desks, in porcelain mugs at Sunday breakfasts. Slowly, a global ritual settles into place. Wake up, brew, sip, repeat. Coffee has become the background hum of modern life. And now, as the century wanes, you feel yourself slowing too. The clamor of revolutions, the roar of factories, the chatter of salons, all fade into something softer. Coffee is no longer just a tale of kings, smugglers, and philosophers. It is your neighbor's morning mug, your coworker's mid-afternoon break, your own little anchor in the rush of the day. You sit quietly with a cup, watching the steam rise. The world is vast and busy, but this moment is small and calm. Each sip carries echoes of Ethiopian hills, Ottoman prayers, Venetian docks, London arguments, and Parisian wit. And yet, here, it is simply warm, steady, familiar. Now the pacing softens, the words lengthen, the images grow gentler. Picture the cup in your hands, its warmth seeping into your palms. Picture the steam drifting upward, curling, fading. Picture the day outside settling into quiet, the lights dimming, the hum of the world softening to a lull. Coffee's journey is long, complicated, and sometimes bitter, but here, at the edge of the story, it is only soothing. So, let your eyes rest. Let your breath slow. Imagine the last sip, gentle and sweet, carrying you towards sleep. The story can pause now, and you can drift, carried by the rhythm of centuries, into the calm of your own night.